Hi guys, is Nigel Farage's new economic policy good for ordinary people? Well, Laura Beveridge, who's a quality journalist at Politics Joe, had this to say about Nigel Farage's plan when it came to tax cuts. Have a listen.
You can't fund tax cuts with benefit cuts. That was tried in 2010 under the Conservative government, and it frankly doesn't work. And we've seen what happens when Reform get control of a budget. They said they were going to find all these cuts at a local authority level, and they get in control, and what happens? Kent County Council, it now looks like we'll raise taxes. And frankly, I find a lot of the rhetoric around welfare quite disturbing, especially, and I'd like to see Labour put forward a more positive case for welfare spending, because working class people spend money within their local economies. They don't funnel it into property and extract it from circulation.
What do you say to that?
We have, as I've said, I know I'm sort of repeating myself, but we have in terms of Sir Stephen Sims setting out a very compassionate way into reform the welfare bill, trying to allow people a path into work, but also protecting the most vulnerable by doing that. I think that sits within our values as a Labour Party, and that's what the government should be doing, and that's what they are doing.
I think Go on. I was going to say, I think that has to extend to the two-child benefit cap as well, which you voted against the SNP amendment to abolish that, but there's both a moral and an economic argument to abolish the two-child benefit cap. Morally, 500,000 children would be lifted out of poverty tomorrow if you abolish that. And as Gordon Brown put forward, that could be paid for with a gambling levy. And on the economic argument, like I said previously, working class people spend money in their local economies.
Well said, well said. As I keep saying, Laura's a quality journalist, and what she's saying here makes complete and utter sense. If you give money to ordinary people, they will spend it. If you give money to the rich, they will hoard it. They will buy assets with it. And what happens to those assets? The price goes up. And this has a trickle-down effect, unfortunately, on people. Not that they benefit, but that they're worse off. Because if the asset prices go up, they drive up the price of all assets. And as homes are an asset, well, it drives up the price of housing. Makes it much less affordable for ordinary people. So when the tax is not collected from the richest in society and is collected from the poorest in society, of course, the poorest will be worse off. What Nigel Farage and Reform are trying to do, of course, is, as we've seen before, impose austerity. What we're going to do is we're going to go after people who don't have money and leave people alone who do have money. We're going to cut public services. Reform keeps saying that they're going to hire more police officers, that they're going to fix public services, going to make sure that the NHS is fit for the future or whatever. But in reality, they're talking about not increasing taxes. They said that they're going to look at the public finances first. Yes, but that's putting the cart before the horse. You need to invest money in public services and then find where you can make savings. But it's also important to remember that when it comes to services like the NHS, which we keep hearing about from the likes of Richard Tice, that it's a money pit, that it needs to be reformed, it needs to be run like a business, we know that you need to have redundancy. You can't have efficiency in the NHS, because the NHS is not a business. It's not run like other public services. You have to have redundancy, contingency whenever there is a crisis, as we saw during the pandemic, where the Tories decided we're not going to provide the NHS with sufficient extra support. We're going to run it as close to the bone as possible. And then what happened? When the pandemic hit, doctors and nurses didn't have the PPE they needed. They didn't have the support they needed. It was necessary to build extra hospitals, the Nightingale hospitals, but what was the problem there? They didn't have the staff to run them. So the problem also here is that while the Conservative Party is disappearing, Reform are replacing them, but they're also replacing them in the sense that they're just copying and pasting a lot of their policies. Reform is a pro-austerity party. They may not openly say this, but they're talking about cuts to public services here. They will call them savings, but in reality they are cuts. They talked about savings in councils, when in reality they realised we can't actually make any savings. We have to actually increase council taxes if we want to maintain the level of support that people are expecting. And remember, as the population gets older, you're going to have more strain, more requirements. placed upon the NHS and social care. Two of the areas that Reform are not talking about. Or if they are talking about the NHS, it's about privatising it or using more an American or other model. They've sort of abandoned the American one. They realised it's too toxic. So Reform want to go in the direction of a more privatised healthcare system. We have no idea what they want to do when it comes to social care. And when it comes to welfare, they want to force people off those benefits, those entitlements, and into jobs at a time when we know that there's a shortage of workers, but there's also a shortage of the skills required for those jobs. So you can't just force people off benefits into these jobs. It doesn't make any sense. But this is what we're going to hear. Tory rhetoric regurgitated through Reform UK, or filtered through Reform UK. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.